In any war, especially the Russian-Ukrainian war, people from Ukraine, from Russia, and from many other places care deeply about what's happening. And they always attack me with the same questions. Why do Ukrainians think we're the enemy? Why do Ukrainians think America isn't helping? We are helping, we volunteer. A huge portion of our taxes goes to supporting Ukraine. So why do they believe that the president we elected? And remember, the whole Russian-speaking diaspora. Even though ethnic Russians are actually a minority among people from the former Soviet Union, why do they think that he's the problem? Over 90% of us voted for President Trump, not once, but 3 times. And I always struggle with this because I ask, where are they getting this from? It's simply not true. I'm in Ukraine constantly, and I see a completely different picture. And the reason is, Ukrainian media, or media that claims to represent Ukraine, shows a very specific narrative in the United States. Trump this, Trump that. Trump is pro-Putin, Trump betrayed them. Trump promised but didn't deliver. Trump said something wrong. For 10 years I've been appearing on Ukrainian channels trying to explain, this is not how it really is. And now, the channel Factum.Info has finally given me the opportunity to explain to the American audience that it's not true. Or at least, not entirely true. And today we have the honor of being joined by Madam Senator Yuliya Yacyk. I want to ask you, in your view, what role does America play, and what role does President Trump play in Ukraine's future? How do you see it? I want our viewers in the United States to hear the other side of this story.
Thank you for inviting me because for me it's very important to communicate Ukraine's position and the position of Ukrainians. To those Ukrainian and post-Soviet communities living in the United States who sincerely care about Ukraine and everything that has been happening in our country for almost 4 years now. Yes, there really is a narrative in Ukraine that Trump is pro-Russian, that America doesn't support Ukraine, and so on. But I want to go back to the root of how this started. Why did this happen? I'm a member of parliament. I originally joined the pro-presidential faction, but now I'm an independent MP, not affiliated with any political group. That gives me a certain freedom in what I say, how I vote, and so on. I represent a region that is currently occupied, the Zaporizhia region, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, Energodar, Vasilivka, and other towns. From the very beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, most of Zaporizhia, about 72%, was occupied. And one of the members of the U.S. Congress who responded to my invitation to visit frontline Zaporizhia to spend time with our soldiers and territorial defense units who defended their land from day one was Congresswoman Victoria Spartz from Indiana. In September 2022, she came to Ukraine. She was in the combat zone. She took part in a ceremony where soldiers were inducted into the Cossacks. She spoke with our troops. She did everything she could to lobby for support, at that time, for the Lend-Lease package, which was later passed under pressure. But right after her visit, the first thing that appeared in the media was, America no longer supports Ukraine. Victoria Spartz accuses Yermak of corruption, claiming he is corrupt, and therefore she must be playing for the other side, acting in Russia's interest. And that narrative hung in the air for a long time. Whenever any information appeared about corruption or abuse of power in the office of the president, people immediately said, no, that's Russian disinformation, that's Spartz. That's that whole story. They're helping the enemy. And that's exactly when the negative attitude toward Americans began to form. Toward American aid, toward the U.S. position, and toward the support coming not only from America, but also from Europe and the European Union regarding Ukraine. People started saying there's not enough help, not enough weapons, not enough funding to buy weapons, not enough foreign legion volunteers sent to support Ukraine. What else was there? Not enough humanitarian assistance, not a strong enough stance on Ukraine's potential NATO membership. The airspace wasn't closed, and so on. All of this kept piling up.
Though all this happened during Biden's administration.
Of course, of course. And now, when Ukraine's position on the front has seriously worsened, who's to blame? The ones who didn't help enough, who didn't make radical decisions, who weren't firm enough. But the story of Lend-Lease is covered in mystery in Ukraine. Nobody knows that Lend-Lease was passed.
With a supermajority.
Yes. And nobody talks about the fact that Ukraine never initiated the request for that aid. And that's why it never went into effect. Nobody talks about the billions in military aid and financial support allocated for Ukraine, which, as we now see from the Nabu tapes and the Mindich recordings, were being stolen. I'm not saying all of it, but a huge portion.
President Trump talked about this. He constantly repeated $350 billion, $350 billion, and 80% of it never even reached Ukraine. President Zelensky himself said it was something like $175 billion out of 350. So where did the other go?
Exactly. Yes, yes. And to somehow cover up those corruption issues to avoid drawing attention to them, the narrative was always shifted toward America isn't our ally. And I'll tell you even more at one point. Before I knew all this, before I went to America for the first time and heard and saw how things really are, even I believed that propaganda we have only one TV channel, the telethon, which broadcasts whatever the president's office needs, and all other channels simply rebroadcast that telethon. So our freedom of speech, well, our freedom is very limited.
Which, yes, is understandable. During a war, it's hard to balance all of this. And I'm saying this as someone from the military because you have to understand. In the Army, we defend democracy. We don't practice it.